clicking on delete channel because this decision is actually a crossroads. One path leads to quitting, starting over blindly, repeating the same mistakes, while the other path leads to understanding, to analyzing what went wrong, what didn't connect, what failed to capture attention, and more importantly, what could have been turned into a brand if approached differently. And this is where creators either disappear or evolve. Because the truth is brutal but powerful. YouTube doesn't reward effort, it rewards clarity, consistency, and connection. And if your channel lacked those, deleting it won't fix the problem unless you change the strategy, unless you rebuild not just the channel, but the mindset behind it. And this is exactly where most creators fail, because they rush to create again without fixing the foundation. Think about it like this. If your previous channel was a house built without a blueprint, randomly designed, unstable, and confusing to anyone who entered, would you fix the structure or just demolish it and rebuild properly this time, with intention, with vision, with a clear identity that people can instantly recognize and remember? Because that's what a brand does. It makes you unforgettable in a sea of forgettable content. And the most dangerous illusion in this journey is believing that starting fresh automatically means starting better. Because without analysis, without understanding your previous mistakes, you're not starting fresh. You're starting blind, repeating patterns you don't even realize exist. And this is why some creators make 5, 6, even 10 channels and still struggle. Because the issue was never the channel. It was the approach. So before you click that delete button, before you walk away from something you once believed in, pause for a moment and ask yourself the real question. Not, should I delete my channel? But, do I understand why it didn't grow? Because the answer to that question will decide whether your next move leads to success or just another silent channel lost in the endless ocean of content, waiting to be discovered but never seen. Part 2. The silence after you stop uploading feels louder than any failure, like an empty room that still echoes with the energy of what could have been, and somewhere deep inside, a question starts forming, not loud, not obvious, but persistent. Was it the channel or was it me? And that question is dangerous because if you answer it honestly, it forces you to confront something most creators avoid. The uncomfortable truth that success on YouTube is rarely blocked by luck, but almost always limited by understanding, by the ability to see your own content not as the creator who made it, but as the viewer who experiences it for the very first time. Because here's where the real breakdown happens. Creators fall in love with their effort instead of their impact. They spend hours editing, designing thumbnails, writing scripts, but never step back to ask the only question that matters. Would I stop scrolling for this? And that gap between effort and impact is where most channels quietly die, not with a dramatic ending, but with slow invisibility, where videos get uploaded, a few views trickle in, and then nothing, no reaction, no engagement, no signal that the content actually mattered. And this is exactly where branding enters the story, not as a design choice, but as a survival strategy. Because without a clear brand, your content becomes just another voice in a crowded room. And audiences don't have time to figure out who you are. They don't analyze deeply. They react instantly, emotionally, subconsciously deciding in seconds whether you're worth their attention or not. And if your channel doesn't communicate a clear identity immediately, you've already lost them before your video even begins. Think about the channels you personally remember, the ones you recognize instantly even before clicking, and notice how they all have something in common. Not just good content, but a consistent feeling, a recognizable tone, a predictable experience that builds trust over time. And that's what transforms a random channel into a brand. Because branding isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent enough that people know what they're getting every time they see you. Now rewind your own journey and look at your channel from the outside, like a stranger discovering it for the first time, and ask yourself honestly, does it feel like a brand, or does it feel like a collection of random attempts, disconnected ideas, inconsistent visuals, and unclear messaging? Because if it's the second one, then the problem was never your potential. It was the lack of direction, the absence of a clear identity that could anchor your content into something meaningful. This is where most creators face their first real conflict, because building a brand requires commitment. It requires choosing a direction and sticking to it even when results are slow, even when growth isn't immediate, even when doubt creeps in and tells you to change everything again. And that's the moment where many people lose consistency, constantly shifting topics, styles, formats, hoping something will work. But in reality, they're just resetting their progress every time. And here's the deeper insight that changes everything. YouTube growth isn't just about what you upload, it's about what people remember, because views come and go. But memory builds identity, and identity builds loyalty. And loyalty is what turns a viewer into a subscriber, into a supporter, into someone who doesn't just watch your content, but waits for it. And that level of connection only happens when your channel feels like something bigger than just videos. So when you think about deleting your channel, understand what you're really deleting. It's not just content, it's data, it's feedback, it's a history of what worked and what didn't. And if you ignore that, you're throwing away the very clues that could have guided your next move. Because every low-performing video still carries information, patterns, signals about audience behavior that, if analyzed correctly, can become the foundation of a stronger, smarter comeback. But analysis requires honesty, and honesty is uncomfortable because it forces you to admit that maybe the titles weren't strong enough, maybe the thumbnails didn't stand out, maybe the content didn't deliver what it promised, and those realizations can feel like failure, but in reality, they're the beginning of control, because once you understand what went wrong, you gain the power to fix it. And this is the turning point where creators either fall deeper into frustration or rise into awareness, because the moment you shift from why am I not getting views to what is my content lacking, you step into a completely different mindset, one that's focused on improvement instead of blame, on strategy instead of emotion. And that shift is what separates those who quit from those who eventually win. So as the idea of deleting your channel lingers in your mind, realize that the real question isn't whether to delete or continue. It's whether you're ready to evolve, to rebuild not just your channel, but your entire approach, to stop chasing views blindly and start designing content with intention, with clarity, with a brand that people can recognize, trust, and remember. Because in the end, the creators who succeed aren't the ones who never failed. They're the ones who learned how to turn failure into a blueprint for something far more powerful. Part 3. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a creator stops being a creator and starts becoming a strategist. And it doesn't happen when views go up or subscribers increase. It happens when you finally realize that YouTube is not a platform of randomness, but a system of patterns, behaviors, and decisions. And the people who win are not the ones who upload the most, but the ones who understand the game behind the screen, because every click, every scroll, every second of watch time is driven by psychology, not luck. And once you see that clearly, you can never go back to creating blindly again. Picture this. A viewer opens YouTube, not looking for you, not searching for your name, not even aware you exist. And within seconds, they are bombarded with choices. Thumbnails screaming for attention, titles competing for curiosity. And in that chaos, your content has less than a second to make an impression. And that's where the real battle begins, not in editing, not in filming, but in positioning, in how your video presents itself before it is even watched. Because if you lose that first moment, the rest of your effort never even gets a chance to be seen. And this is where most creators misunderstand growth. They think better content automatically means more views, but the truth is harsher than that. Because on YouTube, content is only as valuable as its ability to be clicked. And if your title and thumbnail fail to create curiosity, tension, or clarity, then your video doesn't exist in the eyes of the algorithm. It becomes invisible, no matter how much effort you put into it. And this is why branding and packaging are not optional. They are the entry point to everything else. Now connect this back to your channel, the one you're thinking of deleting, and ask yourself, was your content positioned to win? Or was it simply uploaded with hope, relying on luck to carry it forward? Because hope without strategy is one of the biggest traps creators fall into, believing that consistency alone will eventually pay off, when in reality, consistency without direction just leads to repeated failure, and over time, that failure starts to feel personal. This is where the emotional side of the journey intensifies, because when videos don't perform, it doesn't just feel like content failed. It feels like you failed, like your ideas weren't good enough, like your voice didn't matter. And that internal pressure builds silently, turning motivation into doubt, turning excitement into hesitation, until eventually the idea of quitting feels easier than facing another upload that might not work. But here's the part most people never talk about. The creators who succeed feel the same pressure, the same doubt, the same uncertainty. The difference is they don't let those emotions control their decisions. Instead, they analyze, they adapt, they treat every failure not as a final result, but as feedback, as data that brings them one step closer to understanding what works. And that mindset shift is what transforms the entire journey. Because once you start thinking like this, your channel stops being a reflection of your self-worth and starts becoming a project, something you can improve, refine, optimize. And that separation is powerful because it allows you to experiment without fear, to test ideas without attaching your identity to the outcome. And in that space, growth becomes possible again. Now let's talk about branding from a deeper perspective, not as visuals, but as positioning, because your brand is essentially the answer to one question: why should someone choose you over everything else? And if that answer isn't clear, if it's not instantly understandable, then your channel struggles to stand out no matter how good your content might be, because clarity beats complexity every single time. Think of branding as a promise, a silent agreement between you and your audience that says, if you watch my content, you will feel this, you will learn this, you will experience this. And the stronger and more consistent that promise is, the easier it becomes for people to trust you, to return to your content, to recommend you to others. And that's how channels grow, not just through views, but through recognition. Now imagine rebuilding your channel with this level of awareness, where every video is not just an upload, but a calculated move, where every title is designed to spark curiosity, every thumbnail crafted to stop the scroll, every piece of content aligned with a clear identity that reinforces your brand. And suddenly the game feels different, not easier, but clearer, more controlled, more intentional. And this is where the real decision becomes unavoidable, because now you understand that deleting your channel is not the solution. It's just one option among many. And whether you choose to continue with the same channel or start fresh, the outcome will depend entirely on what you've learned, on whether you carry forward the same mistakes or apply a completely new approach. So as the story unfolds, as the tension between quitting and continuing reaches its peak, one thing becomes clear. You're no longer the same creator who started this journey. You've seen the gaps, you've felt the frustration, and now you're standing at a point where you can either walk away with nothing or rebuild with knowledge, with strategy, with a brand that doesn't just exist on YouTube, but lives in the minds of the people who watch you, remember you, and choose you again and again. Part 4. And then comes the moment most creators avoid for as long as possible, the moment of brutal clarity, when you stop blaming the algorithm, stop questioning luck, and instead sit down with your own content like an outsider, almost like an investigator reviewing evidence, replaying thumbnails, rereading titles, watching your own videos not as the creator who made them, but as the viewer who has no emotional attachment. And in that cold, honest observation, patterns begin to reveal themselves. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore, showing you exactly where attention was lost, where curiosity faded, where expectation didn't match delivery, and suddenly what once felt like random failure starts to look like a series of predictable mistakes. Because the truth is, most channels don't fail dramatically. They fade quietly, slowly losing momentum until uploads feel heavier, motivation drops lower, and every new video carries the weight of past disappointment. And in that state, creators often make the worst decision possible, not because it's logically wrong, but because it's emotionally driven. They either abandon the channel completely or restart without fixing the core issues, repeating the same cycle with a different name, a different logo, but the same underlying problems. And this is where understanding the difference between quitting and resetting becomes critical, because quitting is driven by emotion, by frustration, by the need to escape discomfort, while resetting is strategic, intentional, based on analysis and clarity. And the outcome of these two decisions couldn't be more different, because one leads to repetition and the other leads to progress. Now imagine approaching your channel like a system instead of a passion project, where every element has a purpose, every decision has a reason, and nothing is left to chance, where you break down your content into components: hook, retention, storytelling, value, pacing, and instead of asking, "Did this video do well?" you ask, "Which part of this video worked and which part lost the audience?" And that level of detail is where real improvement begins, because growth doesn't come from uploading more. It comes from understanding deeper. This is also the point where branding evolves from an idea into a structure, because now you're not just thinking about what content to make, you're thinking about how every piece fits into a bigger picture, how your thumbnails look together on a channel page, how your titles create a consistent tone, how your videos reinforce a specific identity. And when all these elements align, something powerful happens. Your channel stops feeling random and starts feeling intentional. And that intention is what audiences recognize, even if they can't explain it. And here's where the psychological shift becomes even more intense. Because as you begin to see these patterns, you also begin to realize how much control you actually have. And that realization can be both empowering and uncomfortable, because it removes excuses, it places responsibility back in your hands, and suddenly success doesn't feel like something distant or unpredictable. It feels like something that requires precision, patience, and discipline. But with that control comes a new kind of pressure, the pressure to execute, to apply what you've learned, to not fall back into old habits. And this is where many creators struggle again, because knowing what to do is not the same as doing it consistently. And consistency at this level isn't just about uploading regularly. It's about maintaining quality, maintaining identity, maintaining a standard that aligns with the brand you're trying to build. At the same time, another conflict begins to surface: the fear of starting over versus the fear of staying the same, because now you understand that your current channel might be fixable, but it also carries history, data, and possibly an audience that didn't connect before, and the idea of starting fresh feels both exciting and risky, like stepping into the unknown with a new identity, but no guarantees. And this is where the decision becomes deeply personal, because there is no single correct answer. Some creators revive old channels and turn them into successful brands, while others start new ones and grow faster with a clearer direction. But in both cases, the success doesn't come from the platform or the reset. It comes from the change in mindset, from the shift in approach, from the willingness to treat YouTube not as a hobby, but as a system that rewards those who understand it. Now imagine yourself a few weeks or months ahead, having made that decision, having either rebuilt your current channel or launched a new one, but this time with intention, with clarity, with a defined brand that guides every piece of content you create. And notice how different the process feels. Not easier, but more controlled, more focused, less chaotic, because now every upload is not a guess. It's a calculated move. And in that space, something subtle but powerful begins to return. Confidence, not the loud emotional kind, but a quiet, steady belief that comes from understanding, from knowing that even if a video doesn't perform, it's not the end. It's just another piece of data, another step in refining your strategy, and that perspective changes everything, because failure no longer feels final. It feels useful. So as the tension that started with a simple question, "Should I delete my channel?" continues to unfold, it becomes clear that the real story was never about deletion or continuation. It was about transformation, about evolving from a creator who reacts emotionally to results into one who responds strategically to feedback, and in that transformation lies the true power of growth. The kind that doesn't depend on luck, doesn't collapse under pressure, and doesn't disappear with a single failed video, but instead builds slowly and steadily into something far more resilient, a brand that not only survives, but stands out.